So it was only a week ago that the fabled predictions markets had Tim Walz at 81% likelihood to win tonight's debate. These are the same markets that predicted smooth sailing for the Titanic, apparently. It was not to be. That was one of the most unbelievable hour and 45-minute television experiences I have seen in a long time. Of course, we're required to watch the debate. It's usually hellish. You're fidgeting. That was a pure joy to watch from beginning to end. The very obvious top-line conclusions. The future of the Republican Party is J.D. Vance. That's what the future looks like. That's where the party is going. That's where its voters are. And he is the supremely articulate spokesman for that brand of Republican politics. He is the future. And the second is that it is never a good idea to choose anybody for any position on the basis of demographic qualifications. Tim Walz was chosen by the Harris campaign because he's a white guy. He is an affirmative action hire, and they're regretting that tonight, as you usually do when you hire people on the basis of irrelevant criteria. So we're going to spend the next little while talking about what we just saw. We're going to be doing it with a politician, actually, sitting politician, because really they're the best situated to understand a debate. The problem is that most politicians are not worth talking to, particularly members of the United States Senate. I first interned there in 1986, and I can tell you almost all senators get worse over time. It is a rare, almost unique few who don't, and the one who is joining us tonight is one of the very few who has instead of becoming rotten, dying soul death, has instead become wiser, more skeptical of government, and less controlled during his time in the United States Senate. And so we are honored to be joined tonight by Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Senator, thanks.
That have an obvious likelihood to impact global temperatures. And so when you view all of this as narrowly as they view it, it becomes a little bit like they're holding a hammer. Everything starts to look like a nail. Everything
well, sure.
looks like a good
and
reason
if you're
to get rid of
telling
carbon
me
fuel.
that bulldozing forests to build solar farms is good for the environment, cutting off the top of mountains to build windmills is green, I guess there's nothing I won't believe if I accept that.
Right. Leaving behind mountains and mountains worth of waste.
Oh, of course.
Some of which is not all that pleasant.
But why not plant trees if you think that if carbon is the problem, then why are you bulldozing forests, which they are doing, I mean, millions of acres, why wouldn't you plant trees instead? I don't really understand.
Well, it's the ultimate virtue signal. Nothing signals virtue quite like bulldozing trees in order to replace them with solar farms.
Not in my world. Bulldozing trees, there's nothing virtuous about that at all. So let me ask you specifically, one of the reasons I'm so grateful that you're here, J.D. Vance, of course, is a senator. Tim Walz is running with a former senator. A lot of the discussion tonight revolved around things that are happening in the body where you've served for a long time. There was a moment when Tim Walz described the so-called border bill, the immigration bill that died in the Congress, as the toughest ever. You were there. What was that bill?
Everything he said was wrong. So here again, Tim Walz is either lying, meaning he knows the truth and he's not stating it, or he's been deceived by somebody else and didn't bother to do his own homework and check it up. In the first place, the reason we have a crisis along the southern border has everything to do with the fact that the current administration refuses to enforce laws as they exist on the books already. The Biden-Harris team has done a phenomenal job at selling a lie. The lie is that we really wanted to fix the border crisis. We just couldn't. So we had to have changes in the law in order for us to enforce the border. Republicans refused to go along with that, so sorry, we can't do anything. All of that is a lie. Existing law allows them to stop the problem. They don't want to do it. So they came up with this bill, and now this bill was negotiated by 2 or 3 people in the Senate, only one of whom is a Republican, my friend and colleague, James Lankford, a great senator from Oklahoma. I really do like James Lankford a lot. I disagree with him on this bill. But Mitch McConnell assigned him to negotiate that bill with Democrats. And at the time he did that, a lot of us told him, look, the best thing you could do with this bill is find a way to negotiate something that says we want to tie Joe Biden to Ukraine for a war that is not ours. will say things like this. A lot of this money, you see, is actually going to go into the U.S. job market. It's going to fund the arms companies, the people who are building the arms being purchased by Ukraine to create American jobs here. That is really unsettling. I find that unsatisfactory, and I find it morally repugnant that we would justify prolonging both the duration and magnifying the severity of somebody else's war half a world away with a nuclear armed power,
Yes.
no less. For the simple reason that, don't worry, it'll make some people here in the United States
Good for
rich.
Raytheon.
That is what I would call immoral, and there's sick bastards who think that way.
Well, I would too. And also, I mean, everyone laments the decline of American manufacturing, but you don't want to live in a country whose only manufacturing center is weapons.
No, yeah, that's right, Tucker. But I would.
I mean,
would
that's
put
just
it,
gross.
No, but I would put it more strongly than that. Obviously, we're not at or anywhere near the point where our only manufacturing sector is weapons. I don't want to go anywhere near the point where we're funding somebody else's war, making it longer, making it more severe against a nuclear armed power, no less, the one that hates us, just on the basis that, well, it'll create some American jobs. That's wrong. That's not who we are.
I wonder how people like Mitch McConnell or your colleagues or anybody in the media, the whole media is this way, get away with pretending to be the defenders of the Ukrainian people when they have abetted the slaughter of the Ukrainian people, an entire generation, hundreds of thousands of people. And then, Zelensky, their guy, has just changed the law in Ukraine so foreign entities can buy Ukrainian farmland. So they're going to lose their population and their land. There will be no recognizable Ukraine in 10 years thanks to these people. How do they get to be the defenders?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And they have good reason to resent the American people, particularly those who have facilitated.
Who, the Ukrainians?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
For that very reason. Because
we
the minute
screwed them.
We came on the scene, and the minute we started spending money to the tune of now close to $200 billion in just a couple of years, we took peace off the table for them. There really were peaceful off-ramps for this thing in the earlier months of the war, particularly during the first year of this particular war in 2022. Those were taken off the table as we started dumping all this money on them. And so, yeah, if I were from Ukraine, I would deeply resent the U.S. government for what we have done there. It has prolonged the war, it's made it more severe, and it's taken peace off the table.
And yet they get to parade around like they're driven by compassion and love for Ukrainians.
Yes. And meanwhile, a number of government leaders in Ukraine and those who are close enough to centers of power that they can profit off of it. I'm willing to bet, Tucker, that there are a lot of very wealthy people in Ukraine.
Well, I've been in
Wealthy in
that
ways that you-
area. I mean, go to Romania, or any of the countries that border Ukraine, and they'll tell you, that all the luxury car dealerships have sold out. I mean, there are a lot of rich people who fled Ukraine. And by the way, I'm not even judging them. I'm just saying that's a fact, whereas people who couldn't afford to run away and go buy a Bentley in Dubai have been killed in the war that we created.
That's why there's this old phrase. A lot of foreign aid is about poor people in rich countries being forced to give money to rich people in poor countries. That's certainly happening here. And that's something that I appreciate, by the way, about J.D. Vance.
Yes.
J.D. Vance, it's somewhat uncommon for a new senator to come in and display as much confidence, respect for colleagues, respect for the system and the process, and complete fearlessness as he had from J.D. Vance. But he did it all in a way that was unassuming, that was unoffensive, that was always respectful to members. But talking about Ukraine makes me remember this aspect of J.D. Vance. He came into the Senate at the beginning of 2023, brand new senator. And he already was one of the few people who was willing to be bold in asking questions that needed to be asked about Ukraine. He's shown that consistently through the entire thing. And as recently as just a few months ago, he and I and a small handful of others stayed up all night on the Senate floor, pushing back on the Ukraine supplemental. We had a lot of people, including members of our own party and the other party, who swore at us and were unhappy with us for that. But J.D. Vance then, as you saw tonight, was respectful back to them, didn't allow it to affect his mood, and just kept right on going. That's the kind of vice president we're going to have.
How is he viewed in the Senate?
He's viewed as somebody who is freakishly smart, who brings receipts. And so if you argue with him, you've got to be prepared. He's always going to be nice and respectful about how he does it. But you will, in part because he's so nice and respectful about it, you'll look like a fool if you show up and you haven't done your homework.
That's why I was a little shocked when Lindsey Graham went out of his way to savagely attack J.D. Vance to Trump back in July, the day before Trump was making this decision. People were very cruel about Vance, off the record. Of course, no one in public, but I know for a fact that they did it. What was that about? Was it personal?
I don't know. To my knowledge, he has never said that publicly. I haven't heard him speak that way of JD in private. But let's assume that he or others were in fact saying those things about him. There are those who feel so passionately about the Ukraine issue that some of them might take such great offense to someone like JD coming along and asking questions, saying, should we really be doing this? And JD comes at this from the vantage point of somebody who speaks with a fair amount of experience. Enlisted in the Marines. He went to school on the GI Bill. And he's got a really good head on his shoulders. And so a lot of people probably resent him from that. And if some of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle were saying things like that, I suspect Ukraine had a lot to do with it.
But it's not. But it sounds like he gets along with people in general. I mean, there are ideological differences that are stark, but from what you're saying, he doesn't have a lot of personal enemies.
Right. Well, he has people who mistreat him. But what I love about JD is that even after someone publicly mistreats him, and I've seen some of our colleagues, including some of our Republican colleagues, do that, the next day, JD Vance will be sitting next to them at lunch, smiling, laughing, not necessarily pretending that the whole thing didn't happen, so much as showing that they're not going to get under his skin. He's not going to let them influence his own behavior.
Man, I wish I had that quality.
Don't we all?
I don't. So there was a moment, I think we have the tape, where he did not allow the contemptible behavior of the moderators to infuriate him. He just kept going. I thought this was one of the coolest moments I've ever seen in a debate. Here it is.
I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank you,
Margaret. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process.
It's really kind of hard to describe how awful Margaret Brennan and Nora O'Donnell are. I think America just saw it. But that was masterful, I thought.
There's so much to unpack there. And you're absolutely right. It was masterful by JD. First of all, kudos to CBS for allowing Governor Walz to quote Matthew 25:40 without interrupting him and saying, I'm sorry, that's an attempt at bringing in foreign disinformation campaigns. We can't accept that.
May those words burn on your tongue.
Right.
That's what I thought.
I mean, I do think there ought to be a general rule if you're going to quote the New Testament maybe you should acknowledge that some of your policies aren't exactly compatible with that. But setting that aside for a minute,
Yes.
I love JD's invocation of this problem with the CBP1 app. I've got a bill to fix this problem, and I've been calling this out for a long time. JD encapsulated that much better and more concisely than I've ever been able to. But they have developed this application that people can use on a smartphone, which all these migrants seem to have. They can go on and just fill in their own biographical information. That then serves as their de facto passport when they get here. They can do whatever they want. They're admitted into the country using that app. And it's one of many examples of how this administration has actively nurtured, fostered, cultured this environment in which migrants come up by the millions. We're talking at least 10 million people who have entered this country illegally since January of 2021. In the meantime, what we've done is we've enriched international drug cartels to the tune of tens of billions of dollars a year. We've also brought in enough fentanyl potentially to kill many tens of millions of Americans. And it's been trafficked in on the backs of women and children, many of whom are being sex trafficked. So this is what we have to thank the Biden-Harris administration for. And this is really how it's happening. But
Wait, so
hats off
Walz
to JD
says
for pointing out why
we've
this is a
had
problem.
this app, the smartphone app, since 1990.
Okay, the fact that they've had an app.
Before smartphones.
Right. That's kind of curious.
what?
How did people use a smartphone app in that era before this happened?
34 years ago.
Secondly,
we've had this app for 34 years. Okay.
There have been computers, of course, that long, but these were not computers that were in the hands of millions of people entering the country unlawfully. And it's been during this administration that they have used this particular
Well, there
system.
was no meaningful internet for most people in 1990.
No.
I mean, I was here. I remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the other, of course, effect is that it's completely, upended American society. So we have this. There's a pretty amazing clip from 2022, 2 years ago, from Tim Walz, bragging about how many refugees Minnesota has, and I just want to play it. It's really short, and I think it just says a lot about the attitude that's inspired what we're seeing now. Here's Tim Walz.
We have more refugees per capita than any other state. That's not just morally a good thing. It's our economic and cultural future. This beautiful diversity we see out in Worthington when I'm there.
Under Walz, and much more chaotic and more violent. But what struck me was we see 50 languages spoken in schools. That's beautiful diversity. It's the opposite of beautiful, and it's not diversity. It's chaos. It means that people can't understand each other. There's nothing that unites people. It means a fractured society. And if you think chaos is beautiful, then, I'm sorry, you're on Satan's team at that point. Chaos is not good. Not being able to understand other people is not good. How is that good?
But remember, Tucker, this is a man who lives at a home where they think it's beautiful to open the windows so that they can smell the burning
that's right.
rubber.
That's right.
And so they do think this is beautiful. Now, I've never been to Worthington, Minnesota. But when I hear him say there are 50 languages spoken in the public schools, I think chaos.
Right.
I think Tower of Babel. Now, the Tower of Babel
That's right.
Resulted the way it did, not as a blessing to those involved in it, but as a curse, as a punishment, because when everybody speaks different languages, they can't understand each other. It's
That's right.
chaos, and people suffer as a result.
And
of
how do the kids get educated? I guess he doesn't care.
They
I thought
don't.
he was an educator.
They don't. And through this process of social promotion and the teachers' unions facilitating the social promotion, they paper over it and they make it look like everything's okay, when we know it's not. This is before we even get to the more dire human costs of the people who have been raped, who have been murdered, who
Right.
have suffered through home invasion robberies, been assaulted and battered as a result of people coming into this country who didn't belong here to begin with.
Given that there's zero support that I can detect in polls for these immigration policies, which are permanent, change the country forever, how is democracy functioning if something this central to a nation's identity, who lives in the country, is taking place without any input at all from the citizens who already live here?
Taking place not only without their meaningful input, but also setting things up so that non-citizens can and will vote in elections. That's why I've spent months, the last few months, trying to push the SAVE Act, trying to attach it to the spending bill. The SAVE Act would make it so that you can't vote in a federal election without showing some type of proof that you are a U.S. citizen and therefore eligible to vote.
Who would be
in US
against
elections.
that?
All Democrats. All Democrats are against it. Now, it passed the House, actually, with bipartisan votes. All the Republicans plus a handful of Democrats voted for it over there. All the Republicans in the Senate supported it, but Senate Democrats blocked it. Now, they blocked it by saying, first and foremost, well, non-citizens don't vote. They can't vote. And anybody who says otherwise, it's just, misinformation campaign, which is what they say about anything they don't like.
Well, then what's wrong with banning it?
Well, that was my question to them always. If it doesn't happen, then we're banning something that doesn't happen. But it's already illegal. Yeah, it's already illegal, but there are all sorts of things that are already illegal that are too easy to carry out, and that's why you need to have some penalties attached to it, which is what the SAVE Act does. It would require the states to ask for some type of proof of immigration status and require the states to cull through their voter registration files to remove non-citizens periodically, and then it imposes a criminal penalty for anyone who knowingly gives a ballot or a voter registration to a non-citizen. So here again, what we've got are laws that have been easy to circumvent. This would have fixed it, and they said it's not necessary because they don't vote because they can't vote. Only every day, Tucker, it becomes more and more apparent that people are getting onto the voter registration files, being non-citizens, because of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the National Voter Registration Act, where they said the states cannot ask for proof of citizenship. And where in all 50 states now, you can apply for and get a driver's license as a non-citizen. And when you do that, if you fill out the NVRA part of the form, you check a box and sign your name, then you are a registered voter, even though you're a non-citizen. And so this is troubling. Meanwhile, you've got the American people who are being ignored.
Wait, and all 50 states issue licenses to illegals?
To non-citizens. All 50 states do. In roughly half of the states, a little more than half of the states, I believe, they will also issue them even to illegal aliens. But in all states, as a non-citizen, you can apply for a driver's license. Now, the purpose of the 1993 National Voter Registration Act.
Motor voter?
Motor voter. Was to make it easy to fill out a driver's license application and simultaneously register to vote. The problem is it makes it way too easier. We've now got 30 million plus non-citizens in this country. And it's so easy to apply for a driver's license today. You add to that the Supreme Court's bad ruling, a bad interpretation of the NVRA, saying the states can't ask for voter ID, and you've got a problem. You add all of that to this major overhaul of immigration policy, undertaken without the consent of the American people, contrary to their will, where the administration is basically just effectively rewriting immigration law by refusing to enforce vast swaths of it. And that's the mess we're in today.
I mean, how could a Republican ever get elected if you've got a brand new electorate brought in by the Democratic Party, given all kinds of free things that American citizens don't get, made dependent on that party for its life? Like, how could you not become a one-party state?
Well, that's the whole idea, Tucker. Remember, the country immediately to our south, Mexico, was ruled by one party.
The PRI,
for most of the 20th century, almost the entirety of it. It was ironically called the Revolutionary Institutional Party.
My favorite name of any party ever.
Both revolutionary and institutional, but they managed to do it. I think the Democrats, whether they realize the PRA angle or not by name, I think that's what they're trying to do here. Think about what they do. So they've brought in 10 million plus non-citizens. They've then shipped them strategically to different parts of the country. Many of those will end up being able to vote, since the SAVE Act, much to my dismay, wasn't attached to this spending bill. If that happens, they may well seize control of things they wouldn't have otherwise controlled. I hope it won't happen, but it could. Once they're in, if Democrats have a clean sweep, meaning they get the White House, they keep the Senate, they take back the House of Representatives, Kamala Harris has made known her agenda to nuke the filibuster in the Senate. And with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin out of the picture, it'll be easier for them to do that if they've got the majority. Once that happens, they will pack the Supreme Court. They will pass voter registration and voter reform bills that will take a lot of the discretion to draw legislative districts away from state legislatures. They'll add D.C. and Puerto Rico as states and make a couple of other changes, including to our campaign finance laws, that together will make an indefinite, perpetual Democratic majority in the United States Congress our new reality. They'll be the pre-party, but for the United States.
You really think they would add Puerto Rico in the district?
Yes, and by so doing, they'll get 4 additional Democratic senator seats. For the foreseeable future, all 4 of those would be predictably, reliably Democrats. And I think that's part of what they've got in mind. But what they want is to not have a meaningful opposition party. You can already tell that they want this by the way they speak to us.
But I thought they were defending democracy. That would end democracy.
No. Look, their conception of democracy is not actually about citizen input. It's about something else. It's about achieving the size, scope, reach, and power of government in general and the federal government in particular. It's about enhancing their ability to carry out their radical, progressive Marxist objectives. And that's what they want to do. They see the rest of us as illegitimate and as obstacles to that task, and therefore people who are deserving of being canceled, of having our votes diluted and not counted.
Do you think that'll happen?
I sure hope not. I pray daily that it won't. But it is our duty as citizens of this great republic to sound the voice of alarm when we see a risk of that happening. And I certainly see that risk here. Look, these really are perilous times, and we can't afford any longer to sugarcoat what it is that they're doing. And what they're doing is really, really dangerous. We've just got to be strong enough to stop them.
So you've seen all kinds of indicators pop up in media outlets that exist really for the people who run the Democratic Party. The Atlantic and the New Yorker specifically, and others, have run pieces recently saying the Constitution is an impediment to progress.
Yes.
You heard John Kerry say it the other day. The First Amendment is the problem. That's not accidental, is it?
No, it's not accidental, nor is it insincere. These guys mean it. They genuinely mean it. Because look, first and foremost, if you view the ultimate objective as being democracy, which I don't think they do, but let's just go with me on this. If they view the ultimate objective as just democracy, as pure. When I first got to the Senate, nobody in elected office would dare to be caught dead saying something.
Ever.
Certainly
maybe.
in our lifetimes.
And just the level of thinking, I mean, really, it's a cliche, but it's true. It really was 3 against 1, and the 1 outshone the 3 with ease. Just on something as small as that, it's not small, but
it's a little more complicated than that. They have to go through a treasury auction process. People buy the bonds, then we print more money. But the problem is, as we get more and more in debt, and as we have to pay, just a few years ago, we were paying $350 billion a year in interest. It's mushroomed in the last couple of years as we've been spending so much more money. Sooner or later, you get to the point where you can't issue enough bonds to keep up with that, not without paying much, much higher yield rates on your bonds. And that's where the money really is going to run out. And that's where we could, in very short order, see the U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency dropping into the Atlantic Ocean, never to be seen again in our lifetimes.
And then what happens?
That's truly scary. Well, then we, as a people, endure one of the single greatest upheavals that our country has ever known, and one of the greatest economic upheavals that any group of people could go through. Because when you've been used to the blessings, the benefits associated with having the world's reserve currency be your country's currency, all kinds of things happen. And it becomes harder and harder for people to gain access to money. Circumstances made worse by federal policies, made by people in Washington, D.C., who convinced themselves and their constituents that they were making the world a better place by making a small handful of people in Washington, D.C. more powerful. He's experienced the pain that can cause. And he's a living example of somebody who has overcome those things, but has overcome them without forgetting from whence he came, without forgetting what it is that helped him overcome some difficult circumstances in his life. It's those people who he has in mind. It's those people who animated him in the first instance to run for the United States Senate and then to fight like crazy once he got there for what he sincerely and correctly believes would benefit them. And that's a government that's more accountable to its people and more accountable based on core principles embedded in our Constitution.
So I said that was going to be my last question, but I do have one last question, which is of deep interest to me as a lifelong resident of Washington. You're one of the very few members of the Senate who seems less sympathetic to Washington, more skeptical after more than a dozen years there. Why is that?
Look, in Washington, D.C., you see a lot of things that have gone wrong. The closer you get to that, the less attractive it is. You see everything, warts and all. I became, as a young man, as a teenager, I was a Republican. I went on served a 2-year mission from my church along the U.S.-Mexico border. And it was during that time period, even though politics aren't relevant to missionary service, I saw and experienced things there that turned me from a Republican into a conservative. And it's a lot of the same things that J.D. Vance has experienced and that have caused him to come out a deep skeptic of the federal government, because I saw federal policies that were locking families into poverty for generations, federal policies that were causing people to make rational decisions that were harmful to their families in order to continue in that cycle of poverty, perpetuated by that. The longer I've served in the Senate, the more that I've seen Washington, D.C. is perpetuating the very problems that the Constitution was designed to protect us against. They all involve the dangerous accumulation of power in the hands of the few. We've seen that in most of corporate America. The news media establishment and the entertainment media establishment have all bought into the progressive vision. And the progressive vision is itself fundamentally at odds with the Constitution. The progressive vision is all about concentration of power, giving it to so-called experts, even at the expense of democratic input from the people. But the more they catch the vision of what's gone wrong, and the fact that what's gone wrong is inexorably tied to our deviation from that founding document, a document that I tend to believe was written by wise men raised up by God to that very purpose, even the U.S. Constitution. I think more people are seeing that every day. And whether they know it as a constitutional doctrine or not, they know something is dangerously wrong in Washington, because by their fruits you shall know them. And the fruits of Washington, D.C. are such that the American people are poorer. They are less free than they have ever been, because they're living under the oppressive yoke of a government that makes laws with impunity in a way that would make King George III blush.
That's true.
This time we don't have to have a revolutionary war to change that, because our law already protects us with the things that we need. We just need to know what those things are, what the protections are, and that the whole point of the Constitution is to make the federal government less powerful and therefore less easily abused. But they're waking up to that every single day. Donald Trump doesn't necessarily speak in the same terms that I do. He doesn't necessarily put it in terms of federalism, separation of powers, and the
doesn't necessarily. That's
structural
true.
dispersion of power. But he gets it. He gets it because he cares deeply about the American people and sees that they too are suffering under that oppressive yoke of government. That's why we've got a real singular opportunity with this election. And I hope and pray and have every expectation that the American people will do what they have to do to restore the Constitution, and that's by voting for Trump and Vance.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah. By the way, not words I thought you would have said 8 years ago. It's just it's been amazing to watch you with great admiration. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
By the way, we have a documentary series that starts right now tonight. There are going to be 6 episodes total. The first one is now available. It's on TCN. It's called Art of the Surge. We've had someone embedded with the Trump campaign, a bunch of people embedded with the Trump campaign, and they've got a ton of amazing footage that you will see nowhere else. True. So that's on TCN. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow.